I read the book called The Hot Zone, written by Richard Preston and published in 1994. The novel is a true story written by Richard Preston. The story is about a deadly virus from the Central African rainforest that finds its way to Washington, D.C. There is no cure for the disease. 90% of the people that get infected die in the first few days. It is discovered that there are 4 sister strains from a family called the filovirus family. The first one is Ebola Zaire. It is the most deadly with a 90% kill rate. Ebola Sudan has a 70% kill rate. The third one, Marburg, has a 30% kill rate. And the last one, Ebola Reston, is the only virus that is harmless to humans but is deadly to monkeys. The story begins in 1980 in a country called Kenya, where a Frenchman named Charles Monette, who lives at the base of Mount Elgon. Charles Monette is an amateur naturalist who decides to use his winter holidays for a camping trip to the national park on Mount Elgon. Monette invites one of his friends to join him. When they arrive to Mount Elgon, they decide to explore Kedum Cave. 7 days after the trip to Kedum Cave, Monette develops a severe headache. 3 days after his headache begins, Monette starts to develop a fever and starts to vomit uncontrollably. His personality starts to change. He becomes resentful to his housekeeper. As his eyeballs turn red and his skin takes on a yellowish shade, Monette's housekeeper starts to fear the worst. Charles Monette has gone to many hospitals, but none of the doctors can diagnose him, so he is recommended treatment at Nairobi Hospital. During his flight to Nairobi, Monette becomes increasingly sick and begins to vomit up blood. Monette manages to take a taxi to Nairobi Hospital before collapsing and bleeding out in the waiting room. Dr. Shem Musaki is the first to arrive. Monette suddenly vomits on Dr. Musaki and dies. After an autopsy, they are unable to diagnose the cause of death. He becomes dizzy and utterly weak, and his spine goes limp and nerveless as he loses all sense of balance. The room is turning around and around. He's going into shock. He leans over, head on his knees, and brings up an incredible quantity of blood from his stomach and spills it onto the floor with a gasping groan. He loses consciousness and pitches forward onto the floor. The only sound is a choking in his throat as he continues to vomit blood and black matter while unconscious. Then comes a sound like a bedsheet being torn in half, which is the sound of his bowels opening and venting blood from the anus. The blood is mixed with intestinal lining. He has sloughed his gut. The linings of his intestines have come off and are being expelled along with huge amounts of blood. Monette has crashed and is bleeding out. The other patients in the waiting room stand up and move away from the man on the floor, calling for a doctor. Pools of blood spread out around him, enlarging rapidly. Having destroyed its host, the hot agent is now coming out of every orifice and is trying to find a new host. After this, the story shifts to several American scientists who spend their lives wearing spacesuits and researching hot agents, hoping they will be able to discover a vaccine or a cure that will protect the human race. One of the scientists is Nancy Jacks, an Army veterinarian and mother of 2 children. She specializes in hot agents at Fort Detrick in Maryland. During an experiment on Ebola in 1983, Jacks suffers a near exposure to Ebola after ripping her spacesuit in the middle of a dissection. Several years later, Jacks is asked to examine tissue samples from monkeys who are dying of an unknown virus at the Reston facility. When Jacks identifies the virus as a new strain of Ebola, the United States Army and Centers for Disease Control coordinate a secret operation to contain the virus before it can spread to the human population. Read the book to find out what happens with the rest of the human population.